While we don't know much about Nifty, do we know enough about her to figure out what her sin is? Absolutely, but before we begin, please consider subscribing to my channel. I create theory videos on animated shows such as Hazbin Hotel and Hell of a Boss, as well as even more content which you should definitely check out on my channel page after you finish watching this video.
I'm too rich and too influential to give a flying fuck about what some tuck-swearing demon princess wants to advertise.
Before we get theorizing, first we need to lay down some background info. Nifty is 22 and died during the 1950s. Outside of being a great cleaner, she's also the Happy Hotel's cook and has been stated to be proficient at sewing. Her skill set is typical of your stereotypical 50s housewife, and as this was before the women's liberation movement and the expectation for ordinary women was to become housewives, we can assume that she was a housewife or at the very least aspire to be one. And that's about all we know for her background. But how do we find out more? Well, Viv has stated that when sinners die, the form their soul takes is a reflection of their life on Earth. In other words, we can learn more about Nifty's life on Earth by looking at her appearance. Nifty's poodle skirt outfit is emblematic of women's fashion in the 1950s, which makes sense as we know she lived during this period. What stands out about the outfit to me, however, are the red splotches that look a lot like bloodstains. Believe it or not every poodle skirt outfit has splotches of blood all over it.
Are you shitting me?
This could indicate that she died from being shot, as the blood is circular like from what's typical of a bullet wound. But before we jump the gun, let's discuss her hair. Interestingly, it somewhat resembles a flame, and fire seems to be a recurring theme for Nifty. If the bloodstains tell us how she died, then maybe instead her hair pertains more to her sin. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. And last but not least, we couldn't talk about Nifty's appearance without mentioning her eye. The meaning of this feature is perhaps more ambiguous than the meaning of the other ones. But for the sake of my argument, I'm going to say it indicates something more symbolic, specifically that it represents fixation or obsession. Why? Well, just look at her obsessive attitude towards mess. Regardless of if her eye does indicate this or not, it's apparent to me that she has some type of OCD. So what now? Well, before we figure out her sin, we first need to deduce her motive. And in my opinion, the most likely candidate is love. For one thing, clearly being devoted to the 1950s housewife lifestyle suggests that she holds great stock in being somebody's significant other. And it goes even deeper. Not only was Nifty upset due to the lack of men in the hotel,
Why are you all women? Are there any men here? I'm sorry, that's rude.
but her Instagram page is exclusively just pictures of herself or men. This woman is desperate for a man, and most definitely for a man to love her back. Getting back on topic, my guess is that Nifty had an unrequited love back on Earth. You might be thinking, well, wasn't she a housewife to her husband though? And my answer to that is not necessarily. Being described as hopeless at romance, I'd argue that while she seems like the perfect housewife, that perhaps she never was one. Being the hopeless romantic that she is, it's possible that she instead desperately wanted this person to be her husband, and so she built her life around being the perfect housewife for him. So that's all very well and good. But how did that love turn into sin? That brings us to the second part of her motive. It's fair to say that the biggest cause of love turning sour is jealousy, and I think Nifty's case is no different. I believe that she had her love interest stolen by another woman, and so she needed her out of the way. Specifically, I think she went as far as murdering her. While you may question whether or not someone as sweet and as innocent looking as Nifty would be capable of murder, I'd argue that this adorable little lady is more capable of such feats than you may realise. If the way she obsesses over mess is anything to go by, it isn't too hard to imagine what this fixation could look like when directed towards someone she loves instead. Further still, on her Instagram, she's boasted about killing vermin, 34 rats to be exact, underneath the hotel. If this isn't enough to convince you that she's got a bit of a dark side, check out that menacing grin on her face. This woman will use all means necessary to get what she wants, and takes pleasure in doing so, even if it means getting a little dirty. And let's not forget she's palsy with Mr. Murderer Cannibal himself, Alastor, which we'll be coming back to in a moment. So at this point, it's looking rather likely that her sin was wrath. But we still need to figure out how it all went down. To be more precise, how did she kill her victim, and how did Nifty die? While I do think the answer to both of these questions is in a fire, I believe it's a bit more complicated than that, as it doesn't account for the bloodstains on her top. With that being said, this is roughly how I imagine the scenario played out. Somehow Nifty breaks into the house of her crush's fiancé, then perhaps after a bit of a struggle, Nifty pushes her into the fireplace. Nifty then turns around to escape, but before she can, she sees her love interest pointing a gun at her. He shoots her 3 times, and Nifty stumbles back onto the fireplace and dies along with his partner. So it's time to tie up a few loose ends. Why specifically a fireplace and not some other fire-related murder? Well, not only would this account for Nifty's connection with fire, it may be that Alastor summoning her from a fireplace was more than just a coincidence. Speaking of our sweet radio demon, this is what I believe may have happened to Nifty's former love interest. After the event of Nifty and her partner's death, the man might have died shortly after. Naturally, he would have wound up in hell because revenge murdering Nifty. It's reasonable to imagine that he might be after Nifty for revenge again. So I wonder if Alastor's part of the deal to Nifty was to protect her from her former crush.
I suppose I can cash in a few favors to liven things up.
And that's all I have for now. Thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe, comment with your theories down below or what you thought of mine, and I'll see you next time.